Hey guys, it's Kanenhariyo. I got asked to speak at a United Nations side table discussion on violations of Indigenous people in Canada, the US, and Australia. And I spoke as a panelist yesterday, September 27, 2021. And I wanted to share with you the clip of my speech at the UN. And I hope that it's useful, and I hope that you appreciate the effort put in. There was a direct call to action and an investigation into genocide by the Russian ambassador that was present in the meeting, which I found pretty powerful. So here you go, have a listen.
Bienvenidos a todos y cada uno de ustedes. Es nuestro honor contar con su presencia y sin más que hacer referencia, queremos invitar a Seth, él es líder de la nación Mohawk de Canadá. Seth, bienvenido.
Sego, are you
Seth,
able to hear me?
abre tu micrófono para que podamos escucharte.
Sego.
Perfecto.
What can we do? We're Kanenhariyo ni yung gets walk scare wage. Kanushina unwe ni the wage no. Gone to Gigantege Gidro. I'd like to bring you some words of thanksgiving and acknowledgement and greetings. My name is Kanenhariyo, and I'm of the Bear Clan, and I'm of the Mohawk Nation. So I've been listening to translations in Spanish and English and so on, and I keep hearing the words the leader of the Mohawks, and that's not quite how it is, but it's kind of funny actually. So my people, we have been dealing with colonization for hundreds of years now, and I've listened to people speak on the issue, and I believe that there's a bit of a misunderstanding here in that the colonization was something of the past that occurred, and that there was dark times and that they completed or they finished, and in fact they have not at all. And so I would like to share a few historical anecdotes about that, but I know I only have a short amount of time to speak, and I don't want to spend too much time talking about historical things that occurred, because you can all look them up. What I would like to talk about today is some of the things that we're experiencing right now. And more so, I seek to speak about what we've been meeting about over the last few years, Indigenous leaders across the country, talking about solutions. Because we continue to hear the same suggestions coming from the international community, and that is to pressure the Canadian government or American government, or in this case, the Australian government, to change their ways, to change their policies. But that's operating on the premise that they wish to be good people. But we have to remember why the discrimination against Indigenous people occurs in the first place. And that's where I want to begin. So, what occurred here in Canada was that a group of people came here from Britain and from France and Germany and even Denmark. And they seek to have a place to hide from political exile or religious exile or an economic opportunity. And so they came here, and they were weak, and they needed help. And so a number of Indigenous nations, mine included, the Mohawk people, we call ourselves the Kanenhariyo. We made friendship with these people that came here. We made treaties with them. We made compacts of trade and peace and caring for one another. But over time, those agreements were slowly eroded and worked away. And as in Europe, there was trouble. There was fighting going on amongst the French and British and Spanish and so on. And eventually here in Canada, what happened was that the King of England in, 1780s, he kind of declared himself the first world power. And he claimed this lands where we live and all in this area as he's a rightful one to expand there and to build relationships there and to make treaties and for his people to establish colonies. So that meant the French and Germans and everybody else couldn't. That was what his position was. The reason why that's important is because to this day, all of the state and indigenous people relations are all based on the premise of a relationship between ourselves, our nations, and the crown. They represent the crown, and that crown interest being a monarchy of Britain. Canada is still to this day a parliamentary monarchy, so they have a king or a queen. And so all of our relationships, all of our treaties and the agreements that have been made have all been made on this premise that we've got this so-called nation-to-nation relationship. But when Canada was formed, there was a man, his name was Sir John A. Macdonald. He was a lawyer, and when him and his friends gathered together and organized Canada, they structured what they called the Dominion, and they requested to have a parliamentary democracy, and then they claimed all the territory in what is currently called Canada as under their dominion, and they claimed all of the indigenous people as their responsibility or their property. And so we were swept up in a political movement that occurred both here, but also connected to Europe and connected to the British crown without our consent. And then what they did was they moved across the land making these what they called treaties, but what they were attempting to do was to create land purchases to acquire our lands, because the time when they developed the Canada, they were instructed that they needed to have relationships with the indigenous people because the indigenous people own the land. And so it is the foundation of all the discrimination that we've been experiencing across the Americas, but particularly in Canada, has been about the acquisition, the dominance, and the control of our lands and resources. So to this day, indigenous people are kept on a list, and they call it a ban list or Indian Affairs list. They created an entire department within their government to subdue and oppress us. And they call it, they're currently calling it Indigenous Affairs, but it's had multiple names over the last 150 some years. And so we're all assigned a number. They call a status number. It's the same numerical system that they use in their prison system. So many of us believe that these lands that they set aside, they call them reserve lands. They're like little tiny postage stamps of our territory where they allow us to live on them. They apply this act they call the Indian Act, and it's a set of rules that are separate from everybody else about how we can live on our land. So even the land that's supposed to be set aside for us, they claim as theirs. And so they control the resources, and they held us in what they called like wards of the state. So all the indigenous people in Canada are registered on this list and are considered irresponsible and childlike is how they described it. And so we're not able to manage our own affairs, and they took over all of our resources and our money. In fact, when they did that in the 1880s, they didn't allow any Indians, any indigenous people, to even have a bank account until 1953. And the first time an indigenous person wrote a check and cashed a check in Canada was in 1953. It was from the home community I'm from, Kanenhariyo, and it was they paid for fireman services to the local town next door to us. So you can imagine how far it's taken us that we had to. They weren't even allowing us to even have our own banks. So today we live in a time when they continue to claim all of the resources in our territories as their own. And so many of the countries, China, Korea, Britain, everywhere all over the world, countries are buying resources that are coming from indigenous lands without the consent of the indigenous people. And they're being extracted from our lands and removed as our resources. And they hold us as wards. And so Canada holds the position that we're incapable of managing our own affairs. And so they're managing for us as trustees. So they're selling our resources, oil, trees, fish, all these sort of things, supposedly on our behalf. That's how they have things structured within the Indian Act. And no one in the world knows that. But we're held in perpetual state of wardship, like we're children. And we're unable to access our own resources. They also here in this country, in Canada, they claim large portions of our lands as their own, even if they don't have a treaty or there hasn't been an agreement made. So, for example, right now in British Columbia, there's a number of pipelines that are attempted to be being built across indigenous lands, and the indigenous people are against it and are trying to stop it. And Canada sends militarized police in and criminalizes and attacks the indigenous people who have a right on their own land. Even their Canadian courts have acknowledged this is those people's land. It's not Canada's, there's no treaty. The Canadian government disregards that. The current Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, he blatantly and openly speaks about how indigenous people do not have a veto right to stop Canadian development across their lands. Like, he just blatantly doesn't even care that he doesn't have a constitutional right to be there or any kind of like agreement or that there's any human rights being violated. Does not care. His father was worse. He was a racist, and you're welcome to look him up. His name was Pierre Elliott Trudeau, and he had a very he had disdain for indigenous people in this country as well. So what we're experiencing is that our lands and resources are being extracted, and we're not being allowed to have freedom, to be free, independent of Canada. And so even when the Geneva Convention, 98 years ago, my people, in a confederacy that we have, political confederacy of other indigenous nations, sent a delegate to what was the League of Nations at the time. His name was Tiskahe. And 98 years ago, I was reading the notes this morning, thinking about what they were saying 100 years ago now. And it was the same thing that we want our freedom. We want to be independent of Canada. We don't want to be a part of these people, and we never accepted the willingness to join them. Yet today, even in this meeting, we make the reference to the Indigenous people of Canada. But that means that we're a part of it. And that's the crux of the problem, is that if the international community seeks to get countries like Canada or the US to change their policies to treat us better, they're set up and structured in a way that they're never going to allow us to have freedom, because freedom means that we take our land with us. And their entire country is based on the premise that it's their land, that they claim our territories as theirs and our resources as theirs.
or that they claim, in the case of Canada, they claim the resources as theirs to access and to sell on our behalf, and that we never get freedom and we never be separate from them. So Deskai came, Levi General, in 98 years ago. I think it was 1921, and he seeked to have a voice at the United Nations. Well, at the time it was the League of Nations, to speak out about what Canada was treating, how Canada was treating us, and Britain pressured the League of Nations to not allow him to have a voice to speak there. So I appreciate being allowed to come here today and being asked to come here today to speak. I think about the efforts that were done 100 years ago, and the same efforts, the same words that he carried then. I wish to push forward that we are a people across the country, across the lands here, claimed under Canada, that we simply wish to be peaceful people, free of Canada, to develop our own economies, to develop our own education systems, develop our own governance and our own currencies, and we're being denied that. And we're being treated like, as Indigenous people, which means the people of the land, that we're somehow incapable to do so, and that's ridiculous and unfair. So I've been thinking a great deal about what solutions there could be, and I spent a number of years researching those. Currently, I know you're all aware that there are undergoing investigations into murdered children. Canada operated a genocide policy of taking all of our kids from our communities for 100 years. And they put them in these things they called schools, these institutions that they had the church operate. The purpose of them was to strip our languages from our people and to strip our knowledge of our land and our identity, so that we would assimilate into them. When I read the Convention Against Genocide, one of the things that is included as genocide is when you forcibly remove children from one group to another, and that's what they did to us. And they did it for 100 years. So they've created a situation in our nations where we have many people who no longer speak our language, no longer know who their political family lines are or what their cultural responsibilities are. The purpose was to assimilate them. The purpose was to strip our identity from us so that we would become Canadians. In my estimation and my looking at what the Geneva Convention says about genocide, forcing a group to become another group, to join into another group, is an act of genocide. And so by Canada claiming us as theirs, a domestic problem, they are in fact doing that. And they've used the education system, or so-called education system, as a way to do it. And those that wouldn't break, those children that wouldn't conform, they killed them. And so as they're going across the country, I believe there's 130 schools that have to that are currently being investigated. And of those so-called schools, I say that because they found graveyards on these playgrounds. Those aren't schools, and they're unmarked. So they didn't tell the families even their children died. They just didn't come home. And currently there are 6,509, I believe, unmarked graves that have been found. And we know those numbers are going to be considerably higher. And that's not including all the people who've just simply who just disappeared. This is what's been going on in Canada. And the last residential school closed in 1996. In addition to residential schools, they use another kind of school called the Indian Day School. And so those were schools that they established inside our communities. And the kids were sent to those schools and were required to go to those schools. And what Canada hasn't been upfront about is that when they passed the policy and that all of Indigenous children have to go to their schools. Although they stopped operating the residential schools, they never stopped the policy that all of our children are required to go to their schools. And so to this day, people are still having to send their children to Canadian public schools or within the Canadian education system, or they utilize what they call the child welfare system to take our children from us. The process of forcing us into assimilation into their system is still ongoing. It's not over. It didn't end. The difference is that our children had to come home at night and sleep in our houses. But that's what's going on. So the Indian day schools were operated very similar to the residential schools. In fact, I'm an Indian day school survivor. I went to one of those, and with my group of cohort of kids that we grew up with, many of us have struggled with reading and writing because it wasn't the focus. It wasn't the focus to teach us that and to get us strong, educate us. There was always funding formula problems, so they didn't have the financial resources to support the kids. That's what happened. So the reason I'm going into all these sort of things is because what's occurring here in Canada is that they criminalize us for standing up for ourselves. They criminalize us for trying to establish economic systems outside of them. All of the things that the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People all lead towards and spell out that we have the right to develop our own economies, our own governance structures, our own policy, how we're going to govern ourselves, even things like trying to develop our own passports. And to this day, we're having problems because the international community continues to look at us as Canada's Indigenous people, as opposed to just Mohawks or Oneidas or all the different various nations that are here. I believe there's 53 independent autonomous nations within the so-called Canadian borders, and we all have our own territory. Some of our peoples have territories larger than Britain, larger than Italy, and those places are allowed to be considered countries. Yet we're not. So we had a series of meetings with the different Indigenous hereditary leaders, traditional tribal leaders across the country, and we talked about what we need to do. And what came about was that there's a strong belief that we need to have Canada charge the genocide. It's not just about human rights violations. It's about the breach of international law, and that we're supposed to have the right to be free and independent people. And so we believe that charges against Canada for genocide could lead towards our freedom. And some of that freedom means that we need to be able to have our lands independent of Canada. So it's unfair to ask us to continue to be situated in such a way that we're included or a part of the people who have been spent 100 years to try to destroy us, and then expect or think that it's going to be okay that they can apologize and maybe change a little bit of policies, and then we continue to stay as Canadians. Because the fact that they made us Canadians is a part of our genocide. So we began to look at what had been done in the past elsewhere in the world, and there was a system that happened after the World War II, where there was a number of countries that had been colonized, or lands had been colonized by various European nations, Belgium, France, Germany, so on, and they pulled out of those countries. And in those cases, there was an agreement that that country, say France, was leaving, they were going to leave, and that it would create a vacuum, a political nightmare. And so there was they created these land trusts, and they allowed other nations to come in to agree to support them and help them develop their economy and develop their governance structure and provide them with military protection while they did that. An example of that is Israel. Israel was established that way. It was established as a Jewish land trust. And Britain and the United States agreed to be their trustees. So what's unique in our situation here in Canada, the US, and Australia is that all three of those countries separated from Britain. So they're not going to pull out and return back to Britain. They seek to stay. They seek to stay, and they seek to claim all of the wealth and all the resources. So they're never gonna on their own make policy to separate themselves or to give back the land, to give back the resources, because that's the whole reason they're there. And so pressuring them to change some of their policy is not going to equate to them allowing us to have our own banks, or for us to allow us to have our own system of economics, or to participate in international trade independent of them, or any of those sort of things, or to develop our governance structures separate or independent from them. And that's in fact what we need. And so I speak out to the international community today, and I ask that you think about this, that I hope that this plants some seeds that will in the future sprout into an opportunity. That if Canada were to be charged with genocide, that the various Indigenous nations who have experienced this genocide would need the political and the financial aid and support to be able to move those agendas forward. We're currently in a situation where we've actually spoke with international lawyers to talk about raising charges against Canada, and it said it might cost us $100,000. But we don't have the financial resources to be able to even come up with $100,000 to move the lawyers forward to submit it in Geneva to begin the process. That's how poor we are, and we're kept that way. Because if we're kept poor, then we're worried about eating, and we're not worried about fighting back for our rights and our lands. And this has been the strategy of Canada for 150 years. In fact, if you Google it, look on the internet, you'll find that Sir John A. Macdonald, the founder of Canada, the first prime minister, he openly said that the key was to starve us. If they could starve us, then we would sign treaties. And so they openly did that, and they ensured that we didn't have access to food and proper health care and proper housing, so that we would be agreeable to give up our lands and our resources in exchange for our life. And today we live in that same situation. In my home community, our land is encroached upon all the way around us. There's cities and towns built on our lands. And when we petition the Canadian government to remove the settlers, they refuse. Even when the courts have acknowledged, their own courts have acknowledged that the land is ours and it has been surrendered. And in fact, it's being occupied illegally. The Canadian government refuses to buy out the people or remove them and give us back our lands. And when they attempt to give us back our lands, they do it in a manner where they seek for us to give it to them first, so that it becomes part of Canada. They're not allowing us to be independent of them. And this is the problem. And then they go out in the world and they make business up deals and in agreements with even countries like China, and sell them oil or so on. But they don't have the right to do it. They're doing it. They're hiding the fact that they're holding themselves as the trustees of Indigenous people who own those lands, who are adamantly saying, no, we don't want this to happen. So this is a problem. And this is ongoing. This is happening now. I have brothers and sisters and friends who are currently trapped in land disputes where the police are criminalizing them and arresting them and taking them away and forcing them into the court systems simply for saying no and standing in the way of so-called development. So this is the situation that we live in. And these are travesties. I live in a community where we've been actively working at developing our own economies, and we've been developing a cannabis industry and a tobacco industry, the Canadian government, the provincial government of Ontario has criminalized us. In fact, where I'm from, many of us, they've blocked us from being able to use the banks. So we can't use banking. We can't get loans to develop our businesses. We can't get loans to, in fact, I was denied to be able to get a loan to even build a house. The government pressures the banks, and then the banks deny us business, and so we can't develop, we can't grow, we can't even get a house. And then they treat us like we're lazy, or that we're poor, or that we're no good. But they've created the scenario so that we are the weakest people, yet we're the owners of the land. So I'd hope to share to the rest of you the idea that maybe we could relook at what they did elsewhere in the world when people were seeking to become free of oppression, and seeking to become free of genocide, and seeking to become free of colonization, and to be creative in a way that will allow us to be able to develop ourselves in accordance to the United Nations rights on Indigenous people, and our right as just as people, as a people, to be able to separate and to be able to take our land with us. Many of our nations have great resources and have a great willingness to interact and share in the world, but we're being denied that opportunity. And the international community is likely unwilling or not wanting to put troops on the ground, or to bring peacekeepers into these lands because maybe they think that the countries are too big, or that they're going to fight them, or so on. But we may be able to look at allowing us to use the international banks, maybe allow us to register our lands in an international land trust, and establish ourselves to create new countries, and to allow us to develop ourselves politically, and to have political relations with us, and not be so worried about what Canada or the US or the Australian government has to say about it.
And sorry, Mr. Seth, I do not want to interrupt, but the time of intervention has fulfilled. You have 2 minutes to conclude, if you want. Thank you so much. Sorry for that.
Oh, no problem. This is the thing that I wanted to raise, the issue that was most important in my mind, because it's easy to find out all the reasons, all of the things of what they're hurting us, how they're hurting us, how they're breaking our rights. But it's not so easy to hear our thinking about how a solution. And so I thank you for giving me the opportunity to come to speak today. And I hope that my words are fall on in your minds, and that you're able to do something with them. And I look forward to a future opportunity to speak again. And I'm glad that I was invited to come. And I thank you all very much. I wish all of you a peaceful day, and I look forward to hearing what everybody else has to say. So that's it for me today. Good day. Miawa.
Thank you so much, Seth. I want to say, on behalf of the whole organizer of this event, thank you for your words. Your words are very valuable for us, because are very, very important, because it's a words of fibers in Canada. Thank you so much again, once again. Well, we are finalizing with our event, but we have 6 minutes more. If anyone of the panelists want to take the floor to the final comments, you have 2 minutes to conclude. I don't know, Hannah, Kimball, Seth, Tien. Only if you have any comment, any final comments.
Sí. Pero...
Okay, I'll say.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say in my language, Nyawakoa, to everybody who came to this this side meeting. In the past, my nation, we had a Venezuelan ambassador to Canada come to our traditional longhouse, and I had an opportunity to speak with him, and we exchanged political work in our nation in Venezuela, and that was a wonderful time. And I see there's some people from Venezuela here, and I wanted to say that I didn't come here with a whole bunch of statistics about what's happening in Canada, because I knew there'd be others that would do so. So I'm very much on the ground working with the people and attuned to what's happening here. And it's true that Canada pretends that it's a champion for human rights, but it tramples ours all over the country. And we desperately need intervention from the international community so that we can change things, what's happening here. And so I'm very glad to see all the different countries and nations of people that are expressing an interest to see what's happening. And we'd hope that there'd be an investigation into genocide into Canada, into the US and into Australia, and particularly look at what relationship or what liability or responsibility the British have and the monarchy, the royal family has in relation to these acts, because there's still a company associated with them. And I would hope that we go past just talking and go past just writing nice words, and to put action to those words so that these situations can change. Because it's not a nice place to live. It's not fair. We didn't leave and go to someone else's land. We don't get the chance to go back home. This is our home. And we're being terrorized in our home by immigrants who came here from all over the world. And they disregard us. And it's not fair. Anyways, I don't want to take up a bunch of time. I'm very thankful that I got the opportunity to speak here. It was sort of short notice, and I'm overwhelmed with the amount of work that's happening here to protect people and land and fighting. And so I didn't get a chance to write out a nice speech. I just spoke from my heart what I believed needed to be said. And I hope that I get an opportunity to speak again, and maybe we'll find ourselves with some action. And I would like to be a part of that. So again, Yawakoa, thank you very much. And I wish all of you a peaceful day. That's all I have to say.